The letter came on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just finished replacing the alternator on my old truck, grease still fresh on my knuckles when I saw the envelope. Plain white, no return address, just urgent, final notice stamped in red. I opened it, expecting some junk or scam. I wasn't expecting a bill for $2,475 in unpaid HOA dues. Problem is, I never signed up for an HOA. I've lived in the same ranch-style house in Maple Hollow for 9 years. Paid off my mortgage early, mind my business, keep my lawn trimmed, help neighbors move furniture when they ask. And not once had I heard of any HOA in this neighborhood, so I did what any sane man would do. I walked over to my neighbor George's house, a 70-something Vietnam vet with a laugh louder than his leaf blower. "George," I said, holding up the letter, "you ever hear about us being in an HOA?" He looked at the paper through his thick glasses, let out a bark of a laugh, then said, "HOA. Around here, that's rich. Who's dumb enough to try that?" Apparently, a woman named Rhonda Jarrell. I met her the next day. Blonde bob, sunglasses too big for her face, and a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was the Constitution itself. She was standing in my driveway when I came home from work, tapping her foot like I was late for detention. "You must be Walter Vaughn," she said, voice sharp enough to slice drywall. "I'm the acting president of the Maple Hollow Property Standards Committee." I raised an eyebrow. "Never heard of it." "Well, you should have. This community ratified the HOA charter 2 years ago. We sent out mailers. You're behind on your dues." "No one voted on anything," I said. "You can't just make up an HOA." She rolled her eyes. "It's not made up. And if you don't pay your balance by the end of the month, we'll be forced to send the debt to collections." I nearly laughed. "Good luck with that." She didn't flinch. Just turned and walked off, muttering something about non-compliant homeowners. 2 weeks later, my credit score dropped nearly 100 points. That's when I knew she wasn't bluffing. I pulled my credit report. Sure enough, there it was, an open collections account from Maple Hollow HOA Services. I called the number listed. Some guy with a fake-sounding name and a thicker accent than mine answered, asking for my social security number to verify identity. I hung up. That's when I knew this wasn't just some HOA power trip. This was a scam. A full-blown, organized fraud ring, and Rhonda Jarrell was at the center of it. I filed a complaint with the credit bureau, started pulling county property records, and asked around. Turns out, Rhonda had been handing out dues notices to over a dozen other residents over the past year. Most ignored her. A few paid just to get her off their backs. But no one had ever seen any real documents, and there had never been a single vote or meeting, the final straw. I found out she'd filed fake liens on 2 properties, both owned by elderly residents who didn't have the energy to fight back. That's when I decided I was done playing nice. HOA story, HOA stories, homeowners association stories. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared, because I was angry. The kind of anger that sits behind your eyes and won't let you think straight. I'd worked 40 years turning wrenches and saving every dime, and now someone with a clipboard and a fake title thought they could just erase that. Not on my watch. By dawn, I'd already called my cousin Dana. She's a paralegal who works for a property law firm in Lubbock. She doesn't talk much, but when she does, it's worth listening. "You pull the county plats yet?" she asked. "Got them in a binder," I said. "No mention of any HOA anywhere." "Then they can't enforce anything. Not unless every homeowner voted and formally recorded it with the county. You'd have to amend each deed. That takes signatures. It's public record." I already knew that. But hearing Dana confirm it was like putting a round in the chamber. "Also," she added, "if she filed fake liens, that's criminal. Could be mail fraud too if she sent demands across state lines." That's when I knew I had to get more than angry. I had to get smart. First step, I went to the county recorder's office. It's a squat brick building that smells like dust and bureaucracy. I requested every recorded document tied to my property and 5 others on my street. 2 hours later, I had a stack of certified copies showing no HOA, no amended covenants, no voting record. Nothing but clean titles going back 20 years. I drove straight to the sheriff's department. Detective Mason met me in interview room 3. He wore a wrinkled shirt and had that weary look you only get from dealing with people who lie for a living. "I've heard of rogue HOAs before," he said, flipping through my copies. "But this is a new one." "She's got a company listed on people's credit files," I said. "Maple Hollow HOA Services. That's interstate fraud if it's not real. We'll need to verify the company registration and trace the collections account. You still got that letter?" I handed it over. He turned it over in his hands like it might bite him. "Okay," he said. "I'll open a file. But you need to get your neighbors talking. If there are more victims, we'll need statements." That wasn't going to be a problem. I spent the next 3 days knocking on doors. Some people were hesitant to talk, worried about retaliation. But when I showed them my credit report and the certified property records, the tide started to turn. Mrs. Alvarez, who ran a daycare out of her home, broke down crying when she realized the lien on her house was bogus. "I paid her $600 last month," she said. We couldn't afford groceries that week. George, my neighbor, handed me a Ziploc bag full of junk mail he'd saved. Inside were 3 demand letters from Rhonda with made-up bylaws in Comic Sans font. But the worst came from a retired teacher named Mr. Shin. He'd sold his truck to make a payment he thought was back property tax. Rhonda had told him the HOA could report him to the IRS if he didn't pay up. She said I had to wire it, he told me. Said checks weren't accepted anymore. That's when I knew this wasn't just a power grab. This was predatory fraud, and she was targeting the elderly on purpose. I called Detective Mason that night and told him everything. He told me he'd already subpoenaed the collection agency listed on my credit report. Turns out Maple Hollow HOA Services wasn't a registered business in the state. It was a DBA doing business as filed under a shell company in Nevada. A company owned by Rhonda's cousin, who'd been arrested 3 years prior for mail fraud tied to a fake roofing business. Things moved fast after that. The sheriff's office got a warrant to search Rhonda's home. They found over 30 binders labeled by street name, each one filled with fake invoices, forged signatures, and photocopies of people's property tax bills with handwritten notes like Target, compliant and elderly tri-lien threat. She wasn't home during the search. She'd left town that morning, but her car was picked up by a traffic cam heading north on Interstate 35. By the following Tuesday, she was arrested at a motel in Wichita Falls. She had 2 burner phones, 4 prepaid debit cards, and a folder full of blank lien forms. The DA filed charges within 48 hours. Wire fraud, forgery, elder exploitation, and running an unlicensed collections operation. But the story didn't end there. I got a call from the credit bureau investigator assigned to my complaint. Her name was Shauna, and she sounded like she hadn't blinked in 3 days. "We found over 70 identical disputes across 3 states, she said. "Same company name, same format, different HOAs. She's been running this scam for at least 2 years. 70, I asked. "That's just what we've confirmed. And she used different aliases on the paperwork. We suspect she was selling the program to other scammers." That's when I realized Rhonda hadn't just invented an HOA, she'd franchised the fraud. By the end of the month, the sheriff's department held a town hall in the elementary school gym. Over 200 people showed up. Mason laid out the whole scheme: how Rhonda had exploited gaps in the property record system, faked legal documents, and used fear to shake down vulnerable homeowners. "We believe this is one of the largest HOA-related fraud cases in the state," he said. "If you received any communication from Maple Hollow HOA Services or anyone claiming to represent them, come forward." People lined up at the microphone, one after another, some angry, some embarrassed, but all ready to fight back. The county commissioner introduced a new ordinance that night too. Any future HOA would require a notarized vote with 75% approval and formal registration with the county clerk's office, no exceptions. Me. I was just glad to see people wake up. We started a neighborhood watch group, not for crime, but for paperwork. Anytime someone gets a suspicious letter now, they bring it to the Thursday night meeting in George's garage. We call it Scam Jamboree. There's coffee, donuts, and a bulletin board where we pin up bad actors like wanted posters. As for Rhonda, she's still behind bars awaiting trial. Last I heard, the feds got involved because of the interstate element. Word is she's looking at serious time. And my credit, it's still recovering. But I've got a lawyer now and we're filing a civil suit for damages, not just for me, for everyone who got hit. I may not have asked for a fight, but I'll be damned if I let someone like her think she can win. Not in my neighborhood, not on my watch. 3 weeks after the town hall, I got a knock at the door that didn't sound like a neighbor. Sharp and methodical 3 raps, a pause, then 2 more. I opened it to find a man in a gray suit holding a leather folder and flashing a badge before I could ask. "Special Agent Corey Nolan, Postal Inspection Service," he said. "You're Walter Vaughn," I nodded, stepping aside. He didn't waste time. "We're working with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Your complaint and the credit bureau's data triggered a federal investigation. We need your help connecting the dots." I led him to the dining table where I'd laid out every document, photo, and timeline I'd compiled. He studied my notes like a man used to finding lies in the margins. "Most victims don't gather this much," he said, flipping through a folder I'd labeled Pattern of Deception. "You ever work in law enforcement?" "No," I said. "I changed fuel injectors for 30 years. But my dad taught me never to let a snake live in your garden." He cracked a grin, then tapped the edge of a page. "This part where she used fake lien threats to prompt wire transfers, that's crucial. Wire fraud's easier to prosecute than people think. Especially when it involves seniors." I watched as he laid out a map I hadn't seen before. Colored pins marked 6 states. Each pin had initials next to it, likely victims. "Rhonda's not the only one," he said. "We've identified 4 others running similar operations. 2 used fake HOA fronts. 1 posed as a debt resolution intermediary. Every one of them ties back to the same shell network in Henderson, Nevada." He pulled out a photo of a man I didn't recognize. Dark hair, gold chain, thick neck. "Name's Trevor Madsen, Rhonda's cousin. He filed the DBA for Maple Hollow HOA Services and 5 other fake companies. We've got him on surveillance entering a UPS mailbox center with envelopes matching the ones you received." I didn't ask how they got the footage. I didn't need to. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Testimony." "Documentation. And if you're willing, a deposition. We're moving to indict on federal charges. We want to show a clear chain of deception from her clipboard to your credit report." I agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, I was inside a federal building downtown, facing a panel of attorneys, a stenographer, and a woman from the Department of Justice, who wore her hair in a tight bun and spoke like every word had been weighed in a courtroom. They asked about the letter, my credit drop, the neighbor statements, and how I'd gathered evidence. I told them everything without gloss, without exaggeration. Just the truth, lined up like fence posts. When I mentioned the binder labeled Elderly Trillion Threat, the room got still. The DOJ attorney's mouth tightened, but she didn't interrupt. After I finished, she leaned forward. "Mr. Vaughn, were you ever contacted by anyone claiming to be a legal representative of the HOA?" "No," I said. "Only Rhonda." "And one guy on the phone who wouldn't give a last name. Did he reference any legal statutes or municipal codes during the call?" He said mandatory assessments under community charter guidelines. That was the phrase. I remember because it sounded like something pulled from a soap commercial. Behind her, one of the attorneys nodded and scribbled something. The deposition ended after 2 hours. I walked out into the Texas heat with Agent Nolan. "You did good," he said. "You just became the backbone of this case. Back in Maple Hollow, things were shifting. The folks who once ignored HOA notices were now swapping stories over backyard fences. Word had spread that Rhonda wasn't just a fraud, but part of something bigger, something that reached well beyond our zip code. One night, George called and said the county clerk wanted to meet. I showed up at the municipal annex and found a group of officials waiting: county attorney, a city councilwoman, and the clerk herself. They discovered that Rhonda had submitted forged petitions to the Planning Commission 2 years prior, documents requesting rezoning authority under a fabricated municipal partnership. It was a long-shot attempt to legitimize her fake HOA post facto. The signatures were names of homeowners on our street, most of them dead or moved away. That's felony forgery, the county attorney said, and she submitted them by mail. That's where your postal inspector friend comes in. The city councilwoman turned to me. We want to make sure this never happens again. We're drafting a local ordinance requiring public hearings for any future HOA establishment recorded with certified attendance and notarized votes. They asked if I'd be willing to speak at the next council meeting. I said yes. The meeting was packed. Press showed up. I took the podium and told them exactly what had happened, not just to me, but to every neighbor who'd lost sleep, money, or peace of mind. This wasn't a misunderstanding, I said. This was a machine built to bleed people dry. It wore the mask of community, but it operated like a con. And if we don't shine a light on it, someone else will do it again, just with a fresh name and a new logo. The ordinance passed unanimously. A week later, I got a letter in the mail, but this time it was real. Official stationery from the DOJ. Rhonda had entered into a plea agreement. She admitted to wire fraud, elder exploitation, and conspiracy to commit mail fraud. In exchange for her cooperation in testifying against her cousin and the other co-conspirators, the prosecution agreed not to pursue the maximum sentence. But the letter included something else. A restitution hearing had been scheduled. Victims were invited to submit impact statements and claims for monetary damages. George called as soon as he got his copy. "You think we'll actually get anything back?" "Maybe not all of it," I said. But even $1 won't go back in her pocket. The hearing happened in a federal courthouse under high ceilings and low patience. Victims from 5 states sat shoulder to shoulder, each with a stack of papers and a story to tell. I sat between Mrs. Alvarez and Mr. Shin. When my turn came, I told the judge how a fake HOA dropped my credit score, nearly cost me my insurance rate, and left my neighbors questioning their safety in their own homes. Fraud that hides behind bureaucracy is the hardest to fight, I said, because it doesn't kick your door in. It just slips a letter through the mail and hopes you'll pay before asking questions. The judge listened, then ordered a restitution pool from assets seized in the investigation, bank accounts, property in Nevada, and prepaid debit funds traced back to the fraud ring. It wouldn't make anyone rich, but it was a start. Rhonda was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 7. Her cousin, Trevor, got 15. The other conspirators were still awaiting trial. Maple Hollow changed after that. Not overnight, but in ways that mattered. The old mailbox units were replaced with locking ones. Seniors got help setting up fraud alerts on their credit. And the Thursday night scam jamboree grew into something bigger: a neighborhood coalition with a hotline, rotating volunteers, and a direct contact at the sheriff's office. As for me, I still fix things. Lawn mowers, fences, the occasional busted alternator. But some nights when I sit out on the porch and watch the sun drop behind the oaks, I think about how close we came to letting fear win. Not here. Not again. It was a quiet Thursday morning when I got the call from Assistant U.S. Attorney Melissa Kearns. I was elbow deep in wiring a new garage light when my phone buzzed. I wiped my hands on my jeans and answered. "Mr. Vaughn, this is Kearns. We've got movement on the restitution fund and a situation in Henderson you need to hear about." I stood up straight. "What kind of situation?" Trevor Madsen Rhonda's cousin has been connected to a second fraud ring. This one's not just paper threats and fake liens. They impersonated county officials and used forged court summons to scare people into wiring payments. I didn't say anything at first. The wind had picked up and the garage door creaked behind me. They used what? I asked. Mock court documents, stamped with fake county seals. They claimed failure to pay HOA dues would result in property seizure and criminal charges. We've confirmed at least 20 households were targeted. And Rhonda, she's cooperating. She's already handed over a hard drive with templates they used. You're on the list, though you never received one of those letters. Madsen held those for the ones who didn't cave early. So I was next, looks like it. But that's not why I called. There's going to be a grand jury hearing in Nevada next week. We'd like you to come. Your documentation helped us secure a federal warrant to seize Madsen's primary residence. We recovered files that name you and several of your neighbors directly. I agreed without hesitation. The flight to Las Vegas was uneventful, but stepping into the federal courthouse across from the Clark County Government Center gave me a chill I didn't expect. It wasn't fear, it was the weight of how far this had all gone. From one fake invoice to criminal impersonation of public officials, the courtroom was windowless, lit by overhead fluorescents. I sat outside the grand jury room until they called me in. Kieran stood at the front, calm and precise. She asked about the documents I'd received, the phone call with the phony collector, and the map I'd seen with Agent Nolan. I answered each question carefully, sticking to what I knew firsthand. Then she handed the jury a photocopy of one of the forged court documents. "Mr. Vaughn, is this the seal that appears on your county's court paperwork?" I leaned forward, scanned it, and shook my head. "No, ours has an embossed border and the date format is different. This one's just a stamp. That's not real." She nodded and turned to the jury. "That's consistent with all 23 victims. None of them lived in counties that used this seal, and none of them had overdue property taxes or HOA dues at the time of contact. That was the heart of it. They'd invented debt to justify threats that mimicked government action. It wasn't just fraud anymore, it was impersonation of federal officers, coercion under false authority. After my testimony, I was escorted out a side door. Kieran's followed a few minutes later. "We're confident the grand jury will indict," she said. "And thanks to the files we seized, we've identified a third tier of the operation. There's more, unfortunately. Madsen hired 2 IT contractors to automate the document generation. They built a database that matched public records names, property values, ages, and assigned each household a pressure rating. The elderly and non-native English speakers were ranked highest." My jaw tightened. "You mean they had an algorithm for fear?" "Exactly," she said. "We're expanding the charges to include conspiracy to commit extortion and elder abuse under the federal statute." Back home, word spread fast. Not because I told anyone, but because the Las Vegas indictments made national news. A few reporters even showed up in Maple Hollow, hoping to speak with victims. Most declined. But George called me one evening, voice more serious than I'd ever heard it. "Walter, you think there's still folks out there who paid and haven't come forward?" "Guaranteed," I said. "Some probably still don't know they were scammed." That's when we decided to do one final thing, close the loop. We printed flyers, not flashy ones, just plain black and white sheets with a headline. "Were you contacted by Maple Hollow HOA services or sent legal threats about fake dues?" At the bottom was a toll-free number staffed by the Dodge's Victim Assistance Team. We posted them at grocery stores, libraries, pharmacies, anywhere someone might see it while running errands. Not just in our town, but in 5 neighboring counties. Within the month, the Dodge's office confirmed over 40 new victims had come forward. One was a retired nurse who'd wired over $8,000 to a fake collections account. Another was a man who'd refinanced his home to settle a non-existent lien. Each new victim made the case stronger. By the time the final federal trial opened against Trevor Madsen, the government had over 100 verified fraud accounts tied to his operations. The court sentenced him to 19 years in federal prison. The IT contractors got 4 and 6 years, respectively, for aiding in document falsification and data exploitation. The judge's closing statement stuck with me. This was not a crime of opportunity but of structure. You used fear as a business model. You preyed on vulnerability with precision. That is not only illegal, it is despicable. With the convictions secured, the restitution fund was finalized. Victims received reimbursement checks over the following months. It wasn't everything, but it was something, enough to close a chapter. I received mine in a plain envelope. Inside was a check for $2,475, full reimbursement, but I didn't cash it right away. Instead, I walked it down to the Thursday night meeting in George's garage. "I want to start a reserve fund," I said. "For the next person who gets a letter they don't understand, so they can afford to fight back." There was a pause. Then Mrs. Alvarez stood up and pulled a 50 from her purse. Mr. Shin added a folded 20. By the end of the night, we had over $700 in a coffee tin labeled Stand Fund. We never called it a legal fund. We never needed to. Everyone understood what it meant. Weeks later, I sat on my porch again, watching the sun lay gold across the rooftops. The wind carried the scent of fresh cut grass and barbecue from a few streets over. No more collection letters. No more false demands. Just the sound of a neighborhood that had finally found its footing, and somewhere in a file cabinet in the U.S. Attorney's office, a case folder with my name on it sat closed, sealed with a note. Resolved. Justice served. That was enough for me.